Welcome to the Resilient Earth podcast, where we talk with speakers from the United States and around the world about the critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking. The music for this podcast is by Eric Alleman, an international composer, pianist, and writer living in the Sea Ranch. You can find Resilient Earth on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, SoundCloud, and wherever you find your podcasts. Today we are talking with Michael Stocker, founder and director of Ocean Conservation Research in Marin County. He has written and spoken about marine bio-acoustics and the impacts ocean noise pollution has on marine life since 1992. We dive first into how U.S. politics could cause major havoc to all ocean life by increasing the noise pollution levels through offshore drilling, wind turbines, and deep sea mining. He speaks with us in this episode just before he left last week for Prague in the Czech Republic to attend the 7th International Conference on the Effects of Noise on Aquatic Life. That and more coming up next. It's good to have you back on the show again, Michael. And again, so much going on in our country. And in fact, Tree, why don't you bring up the topic that you were just discussing?
We know that recently there was a public comment period that ended on June 16th about the offshore oil and gas drilling. And you posted your comment on your website, and I was most impressed by what you wrote. And, I just thought you hit all those essential points so extremely well. So if you want to tell us more about that.
And also the bills that are right now in the process of being amended, two of them which directly affect the marine protected areas.
Well, I mean, these guys really want to tear it all up as fast as possible. And every 5 years, they have to put out a leasing plan and review, and they are supposedly to bring in the most current information. And the last time in 2017, they came out with a plan, and they had a fairly systematic approach where they were going to start in the South Atlantic, and then they were going to move to the Gulf, and then to California, and then to Alaska. And I was working with Oceana and Southern Environmental Law Center and Surfrider of North Carolina. And we worked on it for years, but we managed to jam up the works. And Oceana is particularly good at basically soliciting public support. And when we had Republican representatives on the House floor giving noise demonstrations, we knew we had them. And so we thwarted that whole plan. Then the next administration came in, and 2022, when the review came up again. And fortunately, I think largely due to the efforts of Bernie Sanders, when he realized that he's not going to win the White House after the New Hampshire win, because the New York Times basically put out 11 hit pieces on him in 24 hours. So he decided to, the better part of valor, and he would hand his voters over to Biden if Biden moved left. And so Biden did move left a little bit, and we had the Inflation Reduction Act, which had a lot of great environmental bills in it. Had it not been for Joe Manchin, we would have really made a significant shift. But Joe Manchin kind of jammed up the works. But nonetheless, we still got a lot of good things, including areas in the Outer Continental Shelf that were protected. There was only 3 leasing areas, and there were some of the uglier provisions. This is in the 2022 bill, and it was basically let out in 2023. Purportedly, we would only have another review in 27, but this administration came in, and they immediately, what they did is they have a whole revised plan. And so they're going to drill on all coasts at the same time, and this includes doing seismic surveys in national monuments. So these guys go to the heart of the issue, and they really, they're deliberately being bulls in China shop.
Mhm.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much they're going to listen, but we managed to get 75,000 people or individual comments. I mean, a lot of them were group comments as well. What I put out in my piece included the comments that were a sign-on letter from American Petroleum Institute, and they had some 130 fossil fuel businesses that signed on to it. They have to pay attention to public comments under the National Environmental Policy Act. Is what NEPA really does, is allows the public and stakeholders to comment about particular things that are going to compromise our assets or national assets and environmental, outer continental shelf, of course, but also they have to put announcements out for all kinds of different things. If you want to look at the types of things, you can go to regulations.gov and see what's up. So you get public comments and input on the thing, and 75,000 is pretty good. And seeing as the preponderance of them were against the proposal, there were a number of group sign-on letters put out by Earth Justice and the NRDC, and Oceana, I think, had one. They were basically group sign-on. Group sign-on is more sensible. And so 75,000 comments, they pre-sort them by saying, are you an individual, are you an organization, are you a business, a business stakeholder? They kind of pre-qualify it. I don't know how much these guys are going to pay attention to it, because these guys are not paying attention to anything we want. I mean, 85% of the public is not happy right now with a lot of things, and these guys are just moving ahead. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. Right now, the comments period is out for offshore mining.
Right.
Is it deep sea mining?
Deep sea mining. Yeah, there was this mining company that put in a request for information about leasing areas off American Samoa, and
Right.
it's a horrible idea. I mean, the reason why the United Nations Seabed Authority has formed is because these are the oceans, or I should say the ocean. Everybody's got an interest in it, and we need to make sure that we take care of it. They're talking about going and rutting around in areas where we don't even know what the animals are down there. There's hundreds of thousands of animals that we don't even know what their role is. So the International Seabed Authority has basically been stemming the development of that. There was one effort off of Papua New Guinea that they started to get into and then halted because they realized that we don't even know what kind of damage was going to be done. But with this metals company,
Right. Yeah.
they're appealing to the more prurient side of the Trump administration. It's like, hey, if we can turn it into money, let's go. So
And those companies are all like greenwashing too, in addition to getting the support from this administration.
this administration and its allies are really working overtime in terms of creating alternative narratives that aren't substantiated by science, experience, or the real world. I mean, an example is when Kristi Noem was basically saying Los Angeles was on fire. I had a friend who was going to LA, and her mom said, be careful down there. It's dangerous. It's like a 2-block area. Los Angeles has got, 23 million people or something living in it. And if you believe what these narratives these guys are creating, and it's the same thing about the environment, So anyways, one of the issues with this new seabed mining thing, and again, I don't know how much these guys are going to pay attention to it, because they're still proposing in terms of the offshore drilling. There was another proposal that came up just last week about doing seismic surveys in our national marine sanctuaries. And
Right.
the challenge that we all have is to not tear our hair out.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. What about I guess it was a bill, the legislations that Joe Biden just, days before his presidency ended, that I thought that was supposed to be a very permanent type of protection for this coast.
Well, I mean, this current administration is taking a whole different playbook.
Yeah.
I have no idea what happened to Congress, but the Republicans absolutely have no spine at all. And all the power is being taken away from them. And I can only assume that it's not because they're worried about being primary. I have a feeling that they're worried about being sued, having thugs come and knock their children out, whatever. I mean, it's probably horrible stuff. They're really fearful. And then you have the Democrats who also don't have any spine. When Hakeem Jeffries, after Trump was elected, he says, presidents come and go, but God will be sitting on the throne. I mean, it's like, this is not what I want to hear from you. And there's still, I mean, there's great opportunities. Everybody knows, like 80% of the public is just completely aghast at this immigration thing. And what's Hakeem Jeffries saying about it? I didn't read it. So there's a handful of them, the handful of representatives. The Democratic Party is not reading the tea leaves right now.
They're not reading the tea leaves.
No.
And I want to also bring up the article that you wrote back on June 3rd that you posted on your website, on the Ocean Conservation Research website, about the National Academy of Sciences. It was a troubling report.
Oh, yeah. All right. The boats that we use, the research vessels that we use, the current administration has basically put a halt to all this stuff. And a lot of these boats are 40 to sometimes 60 years old, and they're not suitable for modern science. And we need to build them, and they take 4 to 6 years to build some of these things, sometimes even longer than that. And the current administration has decided that it doesn't want to hear about it, so they've stopped all of the construction and all funding for these ships.
And no one from the federal government showed up to that meeting. Normally doesn't, someone from NOAA or the National Marine Fisheries, the EPA, the Marine Mammal.
If you recall, at that time, that's when DOGE was going in and taking everybody's chair away.
Right.
People were freaked, they were fearful, and they would not get funding to attend a scientific meeting.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. I have a dear friend who we did a project up in Cook Inlet, Manolo Casiote, and he is probably the foremost marine mammologist on belugas generally, and then he was studying a particular case up in the Cook Inlet for, I don't know, 12 years. He had longitudinal studies on these animals, and they're an interesting case because they need ice to live year-round, the ones in the Arctic. But when the ice retreated after the last ice age, these belugas were left in the Cook Inlet, and so they have certain adaptations to that, both social and physiological. But he lost his job. They fired him, and he's working for Microsoft now. This is a guy, and just the well stores of information that he has about this area, these animals, the interactions. His published papers are really brilliant, and they let him go. And I have friends and colleagues who are in NOAA Fisheries, National Marine Fisheries Service, and they're just keeping a real low profile right now. Either that or they're kowtowing.
I too, we knew Maria Brown. We've had her on before, and I ran into her down at the International Ocean Film Festival at the pier there in San Francisco, and she'd been moderating one of the panels, and I went up to her afterwards, and she said that recently they had just taken 20%. They didn't ask whether or not they were, could she go in and reduce the poor performing ones. They took all the top scientists, she said, and they're coming for another 20%. Well, she ended up being part of that 20%, and she had dedicated decades of her life to that program. And she was she was superintendent of both Greater Fairlawns and the Cordell Bank.
Yeah, no, she's a gem.
Yeah.
And he dedicated her life to this. Yeah, these guys are not, I mean, of course we know the waste, fraud, and abuse thing is a there are a couple of people now who have come out of DOGE and saying, I don't know, I was in the VA, and we were there for a while, and we didn't really see a lot. In fact, we saw a pretty efficient running operation there.
I heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah, they're those types. So, I mean, this is really kind of the fallout from Ronald Reagan's, 9 most terrifying words, "I'm with the government and I'm here to help you." That he basically demonized the federal government because these guys don't want to be regulated. It's just that simple. They don't want to play ball. They don't want to level the playing field. They basically want to dominate by power, brute force. And it's to the point now where, I mean, I'm sure you've read all the both speculative and informed discussions about what the technocracy and the Christian right theocracy and where this is headed, that these guys don't have a plan. They have an objective, and their objective is to destroy the whole thing. And once they destroy it, the idea is that they can reconstruct it toward their desires.
I was just talking about that today on the show regarding a review of what happened on No King's Day protest turnout. Yeah. And the manipulative narrative that they use in gaslighting the public.
Right.
We're talking today with Michael Stocker, founder and director of Ocean Conservation Research in Marin County, just prior to his departure to Prague to attend the 7th International Conference on the Effects of Noise on Aquatic Life. I'm Leanne Lindsay, host and producer of Resilient Earth Radio and Podcast, along with my co-host and co-producers, Scott and Tree Mercer of the Mindanoma Whale and Seal Study. Now back to the show.
I went to the Stand Up for Science rally in San Francisco, and the San Francisco Chronicle basically had a helicopter out there shooting the crowd, and the pictures that they published were shot probably at 11 in the morning for a rally that started at noon. And their headline was "Hundreds Showed Up to Stand Up for Science." And I did an informal count, which is easy enough to do. I stood up onto the back of City Hall and kind of looked over the crowds, and there was at least 5,000 people there, at least. And
Wow.
This happened before, when we were objecting to going into Iraq. There was a rally down in San Francisco at that time as well, but the people who were the organizers knew that the press was underreporting this stuff significantly. And so they had a gateway that you had to go through, and you grabbed a piece of paper from somebody, and then you stuck it in a bag. You walked 2 steps and stuck it in a bag. So, essentially separating those actions. And the Chronicle again said, hundreds of people showed up to this rally. When they counted the pieces of paper, it was over 50,000.
50,000.
50,000. And this is the same thing, I've seen numbers shrink and grow for this most recent No Kings Act stuff. The number that the press seems happy with is 5.5 million, but I saw informal counts from 8 to 12 million people. And
same. And I only stuck with the conservative number. I may update that episode to include that data too. Well, why don't we move towards another topic that I wanted to make sure that we cover, because we want to talk about sounds in the ocean. And you also attended a conference back in May, was it, in New Orleans?
Yeah, that was a Acoustic Society conference. And it was a lot of fun. It was a good conference. And New Orleans it's changed a lot. I first time I went to New Orleans was in, I think, 98 or 99. And the hurricane that broke, that destroyed the Ninth Ward really changed a lot of things down there.
Katrina, yeah.
Yeah, Katrina, right. It just changed a lot of attitudes because it was really clear. It seemed to be a very magnanimous place where blacks and whites got along really well and what have you. And after Katrina, it was pretty clear, at least the infrastructure wanted to flush all the African Americans out of there. And some of them are still living in trailer camps outside of town. They mowed the houses down and a big mess. So that attitude is there now. And I saw, of course, anywhere in America, a lot more people destitute on the streets who were having a hard time. But it was a good conference, and
Wow.
there was a
That's
lot
great.
of good conversations going on. And
Yeah, didn't it start with music acoustics and then go into animal bioacoustics?
well, the way that the Acoustical Society works, there's acoustics is kind of cost cuts everywhere. There's everything from, medical acoustics,
Medical acoustics.
yeah, people using ultrasound, for example, for both vision imaging and for actually doing operations, using.
Ah, right, right.
So there's medical acoustics, there's acoustical oceanography, which I sometimes go into depending upon what they're doing, architectural acoustics, musical acoustics. Uh, there is archaeological acoustics. That's kind of an interesting. So there's all these different sessions, they're going on. I am a member of the animal bioacoustics community, so I go to the AB sessions, and they had some really good stuff there. I think I put another piece out on this interesting imaging system. It was both video and sound, and they had these kind of spheres that had hydrophones on them and also video cameras, and they were able to get like a 360-degree or spherical view of what was going on. So you see these fish, and if you drop a high single hydrophone into a coral reef, you'll hear, this, sputtering and clucking and barking and hoots and things like that. But you don't know where that's coming from because, we can't localize it that well. That sound travels so fast in water that, it really hits. We can't make this time discrimination to determine where it is, between our ears. They have the ability to be able to pinpoint where the sound comes from. So they had these schools of fish, and instead of hearing this, click, 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 you would see where the clicks were coming from. And these fish were clearly making space, communicating with each other, and it's going to really kind of much in the way that drones have changed our understanding of how whales and dolphins behave. This picture behind me is taken with a drone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these animals are playing with each other. They're just goofing off and having a heck of a time. And, so now we're starting to understand behavioral interactions with these animals taken from a perspective that we have not had before. And it's giving us huge amounts of information. Well, I think that this particular 3D imaging will also allow us to, a 3D sound imaging will allow us to really understand how animals in the ocean interact with each other. For example, do dolphins, do they beam information to each other? Why would I say that? Well, there's evidence, pretty clear evidence that dolphins can eavesdrop on each other. So one dolphin will put some biosonar clicks out and then sonify a fish, and the other dolphin will go and grab it. So it's reading the reflection of another dolphin's biosonar and responding to it. So that's an interesting phenomenon of itself. But then this opens up the possibility that these dolphins could actually project images to each other through sound.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, really amazing how that can happen.
Yes.
And the more that we learn about these things, the more that hopefully people will understand also how sounds in the ocean that are human generated impact that kind of communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the models we use in terms of impacting animal communication has to do with masking. And we see that a bit. I mean, I've got some recordings of pilot whales and dolphins, phonating, and then a boat goes through, and you can hear they try to keep up, and at some point in time they just stop.
Here's a clip from a recording about which Michael is talking when it comes to the communication between pilot whales and dolphins and the masking that occurs when a vessel travels overhead and disrupts that communication. and then we'll get back into the conversation.
They have adapted morphologically to this. They have in terms of their stress responses. I mean, there's a lot of studies with, I mean, in the late 90s, they introduced a sonar technology the Navy was using that was called C-53, Charlie 53. Very nasty sound.
Now, prepare your ears for this sonar sound that I'm about to play because it is piercing. So you can just imagine how it impacts marine mammals in this acoustic environment.
Initially, what was happening, these animals are getting startled. So that the first really apparent mass stranding that happened that was caused by the sonar was they were doing a military exercise down in the Bahamas, and coincident with that, some 17 beaked whales and one minke whale washed ashore. Mm-hmm. And when they did necropsies on these animals, they found that the tissues in their body, I mean, they look like milkshakes inside. And why was that? Well, these beaked whales, they dive really deep. You know, they go down 5,000 feet. You know, we're talking about 100 atmospheres. And they have, at surface, they have a 32-liter lung capacity. When they go down that deep, it compresses down to about 2 liters. And wow. It goes into the tissues of their body and what have you. And just like human divers, when they come up, they need to take their time because otherwise they get the bends, you get nitrogen necrosis. So they need to take their time. But what had happened, after all the smoke settled, because initially the Navy was saying, we didn't do that, that's like, let's put 2 and 2 together here and find out if there might be some correlation. So it took a couple of years for people to really realize what had happened. But these animals were diving deep, and then they heard this deafening, nasty signal. It was like ice picks in their ears, and they freaked out, and they rose because they need to breathe. They came to the surface as fast as possible. All that nitrogen necrosis happened. They, just blew up their insides, and they were just, as I said, they would look like milkshakes inside because it was all a mess. And there were a number of strandings for a few years after that. They were associated with C-53 sonar. And then some studies, I think, Brandon Southall Environmental did some behavioral exposure studies on these animals, and they're finding that when you warn them ahead of time that this horrible noise is coming, they leave. They leave the area. So they've got the program. They say, okay, when you hear this stuff, just get out of here. So we haven't had the catastrophic strandings, but we have now a stress response in odontocetes that is it's not good for them. It's not good not good for them.
I was just thinking about the impact on these marine mammals, and they are already stressed enough. Scott and Tree, they've got updates on some of the whale activity along our coast right now, that there's a lot that are showing up that are dead or injured. Did you guys want to just talk on that just a moment?
Oh, sure. The recent strandings in the bay of the grays, an unprecedented number. We're even seen going into the bay over 30. And I think of the 30, 22 of them were dead, washed ashore dead. But that's caused by other reasons, either starvation, which led to ship strikes. Most of them, unfortunately, they were either couldn't reach them to do a necropsy or too far decomposed in order to do a necropsy. But it's a pretty sad situation with what's going on with the gray whales, that is. But I'm interested, Michael, in if they were to start drilling again off the coast, they would have to use the sonar or seismic methods, correct, to find out where the spots are located and
That's why
how
I
That's
would
brought
what
that
the
up.
the survey is really. They have to start. They have to know where the deposits are, and the seismic
right.
survey is essentially this large air gun explosion, or they usually have a number of them, up to 20. They time the explosion so they can aim the impulse in certain ways, what's favorable to what they're trying to pick up. But it's a loud explosion.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can hear these things, 2,000 miles away.
Hmm.
And
2,000 miles.
So
Okay.
the impact of this would be immense, enormous, because of the way sound travels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah, they have been doing surveys in the Gulf of Mexico for as long as they've been drilling down there. And the noises are not deadly noises. It's it's an air gun bubble that pulses out, and it's noisy. It's an explosion. It doesn't kill the whales. What it does damage zooplankton.
Mm.
Seriously. I want to do a study on this, and at some point in time I will. Have to get funding and somebody and a funder with enough imagination. The bubble pulses out, and that's what creates the impulse. But at some point in time, it retracts. And what I think is happening with the zooplankton is that it retracts. And while zooplankton are built to be able to deal with pressure variations, because they dive deep and they come up to the surface at night, and so they have a pressure gradient they can handle. What I think the problem is when the bubble retracts, you get essentially, a negative pressure gradient, and they're not built for that. So it's negative bear trauma, as I think is what's happening. How different animals deal with it, dolphins don't really hear that well in that low frequency range. And, one of the reasons why we had to go and update the marine mammal exposure guidelines to incorporate the various hearing ranges of various animals to, low frequency mystocetes and high frequency odontocetes, and is because they have different hearing regimes that they're working with. That was again another thing that Brandon Southall was able to introduce. And we knew we needed to do that because when you had dolphins that were surfing on the bow waves of seismic survey vessels, obviously they were being exposed to noise that was exceeded the regulatory thresholds, and they weren't being bothered by it, but it was all low frequency noise. On the other hand, the larger whales, the mystocetes, they phonate down in those lower frequencies. So they obviously hear it. And how does it affect them? There was an interesting paper that was written by Susan Parks and Rosalind Rowland. Susan's got a lab up in the Bay of Fundy area, and she's been studying the North Atlantic right whales up there, recording them. And Rosalind Rowland was up there. I don't know if she was out working in the same lab, but they were, probably working together. What Dr. Rowland was doing was measuring the cortisol levels in the feces of these whales. And cortisol is essentially a proxy for stress.
Yes.
And so she was measuring this. And then they were doing this 2000, 2001, 2002. They had the 9/11 disaster, and they shut down the shipping in the world for like a week. and the noise levels went down. And with that, the stress levels went down in these animals. It was really graphic. And when the noise started coming up, the stress levels started coming again. So there's obviously a direct correlation between ambient noise and stress in these animals. So,
And what can be done? I mean, as far as what are you doing at Ocean Conservation Research and what are others doing to raise the awareness about what's happening and if there's some change that can be made? And then I'd like to talk about some of the projects you've got going on.
yeah. Well, what can be done is, I mean, raising awareness is the big thing. I mean, I first started working on this ocean noise issue in 1992, and when I was telling people about noise in the ocean, they didn't have a clue. Jacques Cousteau set my business back 20 years when he came out with the series Monde de Silence. It was, the silent world of Jacques Cousteau. People thought the ocean was silent because it's anything but silent. I mean, sound works so well in the ocean that all these animals have all kinds of amazing adaptations to it in terms of sensing, pressure gradient and particle motion and being able to distinguish sounds in the time domain that allow them to navigate their surroundings in both fine pitch and large pitch ways that, do we know if large whales use low frequency phonations to like biosonar, like the dolphins use high frequency? I mean, it could be that they are making these noises across large distances. And Chris Clark, who was at Cornell, was the head of their bioacoustic department up there for a long time. He's retired. But he put out a paper back, in the early 2000s or something. It wasn't really a paper. You can't really prove or disprove it. But he tracked the migration of humpback whales from the Gulf of Alaska down to Hawaii, because they breed down in Hawaii and they feed up in Alaska. And these animals don't just beeline it. They're not working on a magnetic compass. They're not looking at the stars. They head towards underwater features like a seamount or a ridge line or a trench. So the speculation, which again is something that would be hard to prove because there's no null hypothesis. You couldn't take the sound away and see if they, whatever. And so they're doing essentially echolocating with these in long wavelengths, which brings up another issue having to do with noises that we're making. I've got a paper that's in review right now. Actually, I got it back from review, and I got to do the edits on the thing that looks at the infrasonic, which is the low frequency noise that's generated by wind farms, by wind turbines.
Great.
And it's very noisy. And the problem with that is that, as I point out in the paper, is that if it is true that whales use low frequency noise or sounds that they make to navigate around the world, and it's either through their own signals or being able to hear the pulses of the waves on the beaches or other types of microbaromes that are happening with the swells on top of the water. What's going to happen if that's all masked by the noise of wind farms?
Yeah.
And then we have birds, which we know also use low frequency barometric pressure gradients to navigate. What's going to happen to them if they have 3,000 turbines along the Atlantic flyway, and these animals, which need to know, is a storm front coming? Should we get in front of it, or should we stick to the ground? If it's fluctuating, if it's unstable front, they'll hang out until the kind of wind buffets through the area, and then when they have a real honest decrease in barometric pressure, they'll get up in front of it because they can get tailwinds. You can get 200-mile-an-hour tailwinds, and it helps them migrate. But if the cues that they use to sense the barometric pressure are being masked by 3,000 thumping turbines, what's going to happen? They have this adaptive management paradigm they talk about, which is they're doing things at a level that they can't really determine what the damage is until we start seeing it, because there's no way to test, how is it going to happen? But, by that time, it's going to be too late. Once we start seeing that it's interfering with bird migration, how are you going to adapt to that?
There's just so much short-term thinking versus long-term thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
We talked earlier about both hydrophone and the Farallones. And I believe that's one of the projects you've got going on right now.
Yeah, we're actually working on a proof of concept for this right now. We're going to be putting hydrophone arrays out in next to the shipping lanes, and we'll be able to use those arrays to sight in on whales who might be feeding or frolicking in the shipping lanes, and be able to warn the ships that the whales are there. Well, they can kind of do that right now. There's a project that the Benioff Ocean Institute is funding called Whale Safe.
Mhm.
They have a single hydrophone and they can tell if there's whale activity in the area. And then they have some really excellent behavioral models so they can determine, what type of behavior is going on, where they most likely be found. The challenge that they have is that they're using what's called fast Fourier transform to identify the animal. We need to see the sound. We can't distinguish as precisely as they can the sounds that they're making. So in order to figure out what kind of animals doing what, we need to know what their call repertoire is, and then use that to inform the behavioral models. But FFT only gives you an approximation. You can kind of get a probability map of where they are. That's because that fast Fourier transform is a mathematical process where they divide the signals up into these little frequency bands, and they determine the amplitude of the sound coming out of each of those buckets. And then they can use that to visualize it, to put it up on a screen and visualize it. We're using a process called wavelet analysis, and wavelet analysis is a different way of discriminating sounds. Instead of sucking them up and putting them into filter bins, we are going to be putting them into a process where they have these certain wavelets, signals that interact with the signals, and the interaction pattern lights up. And wavelets was originally designed to process huge amounts of data. This type of process is being used when you're doing a Zoom meeting. The picture behind me is not moving. And so once it's determined what it is, there's no extra data that needs to be processed there. The only thing that needs to be processed right now in terms of the Zoom meeting is my moving lips. Everything else is pretty much static. So the way that wavelets work is when they see something that is different in a data set, it lights it up. And things that are not different, it doesn't process it. So it allows for, you to have a screen with 20 different people on it, all talking away. That's a huge amount of data that is being processed, and they can do it using this type of technique.
And I know you collaborate with so many other organizations. I can imagine the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito being excited about this.
Well, everybody's excited about it. We just need to get the funders excited about it.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think we're pretty hot on the trail now. Once we have a proof of concept, because Benioff was interested in it. We introduced it to them a number of years ago, and they were interested in it, but they needed to see something that was more ambitious, because I was going to basically be sending out the signals and letting people deal with it themselves, and that wasn't sensible. What we're going to do is we're going to basically put out the signal into what they call an automatic identification system, AIS, which is used in the shipping industry to identify boats. So if you type in AIS systems and maritime and look at there's a number of different organizations that process this, and you can see all the boats on the water that are larger than 60 feet, where they're from, what kind of vessel it is, what their heading is, what their speed is. I mean, all this stuff is on screen in the wheelhouse of your boat. It's something that we can then use those AIS signals to identify the whales that we're sighting in on and give them AIS identification numbers. Now we can watch them, and they can show up on the screen in the wheelhouses of these ships, and they can steer clear. They can see them, they can steer clear. So the way that the whale safe system informs skippers is when there's a lot of whale activity, they can slow down voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with that is if they have a tight schedule to meet, it costs money. And in this particular case, if they knew where the whales are, they can actually steer clear of them. They can avoid them, and they won't have to slow down. I have a pal who's a skipper. He's got an organization called BayQuest. They're doing some scientific studies in the bay, but he's a skipper and he's been working 100-ton license. And he said, this thing's going to completely change the game for whales in the ocean. So that's what we're looking to do, to try to save whales.
That's a definite positive thing. And Scott and Tree, I'm sure you've got a lot that you want to ask too, because Michael, you are just filled with so much data and knowledge that you share with us each time. And did you guys have something that you wanted to add here?
Kate Stafford was on a webinar last night talking about her bowhead research, some of it. And she mentioned that when the ice is out and around the Bering area, that the noise will probably go up about 10 times over what it is now. But what I didn't understand was if she meant when the ice is out because that area would be ice-free, or it'd be because of the ice not being there, or if the ice not being there because of shipping traffic. But I was wondering what you thought. If you thought it was she's probably talking about the shipping traffic, it was going to go up 10 times, or if it's because.
Well, that's definitely going to happen if the Arctic is ice-free. There's be people are going to go over the top. They're not going to have to go through Panama Canal.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot more shipping up there. Ice makes noise too. When it cracks and breaks up, it's not really quiet. But this brings up another thing. We're talking about the starving gray whales. Gray whales feed on amphipods. They're mud feeders. They take in mud and they filter out all the various invertebrates in the mud and eat that. They used to call them mud whales because of that. And the amphipods and other invertebrates that are up in the Arctic area where they feed rely on this constant rain of phytoplankton that is coming down from the ice. So that as the ice retracts, that algae source of foods, the amphipods, is going away. And so we're seeing a lot of starvation because the ice pack is disappearing. It's a shame, and there's not really a lot we can do about it. They've seen some opportunistic feeding that these animals do where they're trying to get anchovies or krill or whatever out of the water column. But unlike the rorquals that have pleated gullets, those big pleated gullets that they can fill with lots and lots of water and then squish the water out, and the krill or anchovies or whatever is left behind. The gray whales don't have the pleated gullet. And so they may be able to feed, but is the feeding effort going to pay off? Do they have enough energy that they can get from that they can, basically do that kind of feeding? And there are people studying it right now, but it's not promising.
The length of the gray whales, they're becoming shorter because they're not getting the caloric value for what they're feeding on now. With the decrease in the amphipods, they can adapt to maybe a different source of food, but it's not providing them with that same nutritional value, and they're
considerably
shorter than generations that came before.
Yeah, the feeding effort is challenging. So yeah. It's going to be noisy up there when the ships start going through. I mean, what is the solution to this? There's an interesting propeller design. There's a company called Sharrow, Sharrow, and they have a propeller design that does not cavitate, and it's really quiet. And it's appealing not just in terms of its noise, because I'm sure they'll be a lot more expensive than your standard propeller, because it's an elaborate casting. It's a lot of energy behind a cavitating bubble, and they have to replace the propellers on these large ships every 5 to 7 years because the trailing edge gets all chewed up with this cavitation. And it's expensive to change propeller. It costs millions and millions of dollars. You got to take a ship and to put it in dry dock. You got to pull this thing off. You got to pull another one. So if they had these non-cavitating propellers large enough to push these ships around, that would solve a huge problem.
Wow, that's really interesting. It'll be good to follow up with that. That Sharrow, you said, the company.
Yeah, Sharrow.
And bottom trawling and the noise that generates and the impact that has. I wanted you to touch on that. And anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, well, I mean, bottom trawling, the noise is, whether it's column trawling or bottom trawling, it's the boat's the big noise there, but the devastation to the habitat is unbelievable. I mean, when I was a
Huge.
kid, I used to fish with my family off between Catalina Island and Los Angeles. There was an area called the Horseshoe Kelp, and it was a kelp bed that had been around since the ocean was a lot shallower during the ice age. It was 100 meters shallower out there. The kelp started, and it was like 600 feet deep. Currently, it's 600 feet deep there. Every weekend we go out there, there'd be like 300 boats, people, the recreational fishers, enjoying it, catching bonita and yellowtail and rock cod and all kinds of critters that they were pulling up. And some jerk organization went through there and they drag trawled the entire Horseshoe Kelp
Oh,
Oh,
that
and
hurts.
destroyed it completely. And because it was 600 feet deep, the kelp, it doesn't get any light down, it can't grow.
right.
It had, when it started or was there during the ice age, there was enough light, and then the kelp just grew up larger and larger up towards the sun, and they were able to photosynthesize. They were able to stay alive that way. And this company went out and drag trawled the whole thing and destroyed an asset that thousands and thousands of people fed their family with and enjoyed the holidays, enjoyed the weekends and whatever. And this guy was maybe getting 35 cents a pound for the fish he was pulling in. And he was only, processing the ones that he could sell. The stuff he didn't sell, he just threw it overboard.
It's like comparison of the value of a whale that gets harvested from the ocean instead of thinking about the value of their services over their lifetime and how much more valuable that is than a dead whale.
In the end, all they were doing with the whale is just a blubber. The Japanese and the Norwegians and the Icelandics, they eat the meat, but now the meat is so, because of trophic concentration of heavy metals, it's toxic.
I've been hearing about that too.
Yeah, so.
And Iceland, by the way, I hear whaling has stopped.
They've stopped, yeah. It's not cost effective. They were sending a lot of their whale meat to Japan, and the Japanese were the whalers were trying to get the schools to put it in their menus so that kids would get habituated to it. But when the moms found out about the heavy metal stuff, they says, "Oh, great, another mini Mata. Thank you. We really appreciate your taking care of our kids here." So they weren't able to get that school thing going.
So in these last couple of minutes, Michael, what exactly would you like to convey to our audience again that I know there's so much to cover, but what's really important on the top of your mind right now?
Well, in terms of what we individually can do, there are two things. I tell people, don't buy crap from China. The shipping, I mean, there are 106,000 boats that are insured by Lloyd's of London, and those boats are carrying, I think 20 or 30% of it is fossil fuel. And the rest of it is stuff that we buy that manufactured elsewhere. And if you saw the story of Stuff, it's an interesting animation movie that talks about what happens, how long does the stuff stick around. That stuff lasts about 18 days before, you buy it in the store, and in 18 days, it's mostly thrown away. Most stuff is like that. And so stop buying crap from China. We sell some swag, some t-shirts and things like that, but our stuff is manufactured on this continent. So we don't do the transoceanic shipping. That's the noise thing. And the other is use less energy. I'm headed off to Prague in a few hours, actually. I'm taking off this afternoon. When I go to the airport there, I just go downstairs and grab a train. It's that easy. I was in Washington, D.C. last April. I wanted to take a train from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, and it's like a 5.5-hour car drive. And they were 11.5-hour train rides.
I remember you telling us about this.
Yeah, and they screwed up. And 36 hours after I took off from Washington, D.C., I was in Pittsburgh.
No comparison.
Yeah, hopeless. We have a train here called the Smart Train. It was a Sonoma Marin. I don't know what ART stands for, but it's a train that you can take from Larkspur Landing, where the ferry comes in from San Francisco, all the way up to the Santa Rosa Airport.
That's
And
right.
and they're going to take it up further, I think, eventually. But people have been grousing about, the fact that the ticket sales are not even covering 10% of what the cost of running the thing is. And somebody had done a chat GPT search on all the reasons why this was such a failure. And the question he didn't ask was, how can you justify running a train line and at the same time putting billions of dollars into widening the Petaluma for cars?
Mm-hmm.
People are going to take cars because it's easy.
That's right.
And they're spending billions and billions of dollars on that, and nobody's grousing about that. If they decided to keep the Petaluma narrow, that train would be jam-packed.
Right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, Michael, thank you for bringing us up to speed on so many different topics. You guys cover so much, and we appreciate having you today here to talk with us.
Well, thanks.
Again.
It's been an honor. I really enjoy you guys' company and Ocean Conservation Research. Our website is ocr.org.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a blog site, which is ocean-noise.com.
Oh, okay.
And
That's right. Great example of noises that are natural versus human generated.
yeah,
And-
that's on the ocr.org. There's a sound library on that. That's a lot of fun. There's a lot of other activities on that. And then the Ocean Noise is the website, the blog site is I have some like 650 short 500-word essays on there that talks about this issue.
Really? And you also have your educational series, the video series.
Yeah, that is on YouTube, and I think Vimeo too. I that's Daniela's department.
It's on your website. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
I mean, they're YouTube videos, but they are linked there in one of the pages.
yeah, you can find it there. But also
so much information on your website.
Yeah, I'm an information junkie.
Yeah. Yep, you are, but it's wonderful. All right, safe travels, Michael.
Have a
Okay,
good
thanks.
trip.
Take care. Bye for
Bye-bye
now.
now.
Thanks for listening to the Resilient Earth podcast, where we talk about critical issues and positive actions for our planet. Resilient Earth is produced by Planet Centric Media, a 501c3 nonprofit, and Seastorm Studios, Inc., located on the rugged North Sonoma coast of Northern California. I'm Leanne Lindsay, producer and host, along with co-hosts and co-producers Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, located on the South Mendocino and North Sonoma coasts. The music for this podcast is by Eric Alleman, an international composer, pianist, and writer living in the Sea Ridge. Discover more of his music, animations, ballet, stage, and film work at ericalleman.com. You can find Resilient Earth on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, SoundCloud, and wherever you find your podcasts. Please support us by subscribing or donating to our cause.